Part 1. Living on empty. The cost of forgetting joy. Sophie wasn't unhappy exactly. At least, not in any way she could easily explain. She had a steady job. An apartment that was small but hers. Friends she loved but rarely saw. A life that on paper looked just fine. And yet, most nights she crawled into bed feeling hollow. It wasn't the big tragedies. It was the endless, grinding weight of the small things. The email she forgot to send. The errands she didn't have time for. The missed calls from her mother she didn't return. Day after day, it piled up. Tiny failures, tiny resentments, tiny disappointments she didn't know where to put. So she carried them all, in her chest, her shoulders, her dreams. At work, she plastered on smiles. At home, she numbed out with endless scrolling and mindless shows. When friends asked how she was, she answered automatically. Busy, same old. It became a mantra, a shield, a quiet way of admitting, I'm surviving, not living. Modern life often traps us in cycles of low-grade emotional depletion, not from major traumas, but from the slow erosion of daily joy. Without intentional practices to reconnect with meaning, even the most successful lives can feel strangely empty. One night, after another exhausting day of ticking off endless tasks, Sophie sat on the edge of her bed, staring blankly at the floor. No tears, no drama, just an overwhelming sense of being disconnected from everything that once made her feel alive. She didn't know it yet, but a tiny crack had formed. And through that crack, something new, something quieter, something softer was about to find its way in. It wouldn't be a vacation. It wouldn't be a promotion. It wouldn't be anything the world called success. It would be something far smaller, far simpler. 2 minutes, one line, a habit that would teach her how to see her life differently without changing anything at all. Part 2. 2 minutes before sleep. Starting a gratitude practice. The idea came from a podcast she wasn't really listening to. Some upbeat voice was talking about gratitude journals, about how writing one thing down each night could change your brain chemistry, rewire your perspective, even improve your health. Sophie rolled her eyes. 2 minutes, one line. That's not going to change my life. It sounded too simple, too naive. She wasn't a positive thinking kind of person. She was realistic, practical, tired. Still, something about the ease of it stuck. 2 minutes, one line. What did she have to lose? That night, she pulled out an old notebook from the back of her closet, the one she'd bought years ago with good intentions and forgotten. She flipped to a blank page, held her pen over it, and froze. What was she supposed to be grateful for today? She could barely remember what she had eaten for dinner, let alone find something profound to be thankful for. Finally, after several minutes of staring, she scribbled, I'm grateful for my bed. It felt stupid, embarrassing, almost. But she closed the notebook, placed it on her nightstand, and turned off the light. Studies show that even small, regular expressions of gratitude can increase dopamine and serotonin production, the brain's feel-good chemicals. It's not about listing perfect, profound things. It's about training the mind to notice what is already working. The next night, she did it again. I'm grateful the subway wasn't late. The night after, I'm grateful for my favorite tea. Tiny things, ordinary things. No lightning bolts. No sudden happiness, but a soft shift began. Within a week, she noticed she wasn't dreading bedtime as much. The act of finding one small thing, even on bad days, forced her to sift through the noise of her mind for something gentle, something real. Some days the gratitude felt genuine. Other days it felt mechanical, forced. But she kept going. By the second week, she found herself noticing good moments as they happened. The way the cashier smiled at her. The unexpected warmth of the sun on her walk home. The simple pleasure of a book she almost didn't pick up. She started filing them away mentally, ready to capture one later in her notebook. It was as if a part of her brain, the part tuned to beauty, to goodness, was waking up after a long sleep. Gratitude practices train the reticular activating system, the part of the brain that filters what we notice, to seek out positive cues rather than negative ones. Over time, this neurological rewiring can decrease anxiety, improve emotional resilience, and foster a deeper sense of contentment. Sophie didn't suddenly transform into a beacon of positivity. She still had bad days. She still got overwhelmed, frustrated, lonely. But the gratitude ritual gave her something powerful she hadn't realized she needed. A way to stay connected to herself, even when everything felt messy. Not by denying hardship, not by pretending everything was fine, but by refusing to let the hard parts erase the good ones. Some nights she wrote more than one thing. Some nights she only managed a single word. But night after night she showed up. 2 minutes, one line. A quiet thread she wove between herself and the life she had, not the life she wished she had. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Sophie began to shift. Not because her circumstances changed, not because the world became kinder, but because she started seeing that even on the hardest days, there was still something worth holding on to. A small smile, a warm cup, a soft moment, something real, something hers. Part 3. The night everything fell apart, and the habit that saved her. It started like any ordinary bad day. A rushed morning, a delayed train, an awkward meeting where Sophie's ideas were ignored, a snide email from a colleague that clung to her ribs like a splinter. By mid-afternoon, she felt the familiar fog creeping in, that heavy mix of irritation, sadness, and the slow gnaw of self-doubt. Then came the call. Her landlord was raising the rent. Again, way beyond what she could reasonably afford. Panic bloomed under her ribs. How could she pay more? Where would she move? How would she even find the time to search, to pack, to uproot everything again? It was too much noise, too much weight. By the time she stumbled home, she felt hollowed out, brittle, exhausted, close to breaking. When multiple small stressors compound without emotional regulation, the brain can default to learned helplessness, a state where even manageable problems feel overwhelming and insurmountable. Sophie collapsed onto her bed, still in her work clothes, staring blankly at the ceiling. Old thoughts began to creep in. Nothing ever works out. I'm always behind. I can't do this anymore. The familiar spiral beckoned, pulling at her, promising the bitter comfort of giving up. But then, almost automatically, her hand reached for the notebook on her nightstand. The one she had been writing in every night. The one that somehow she had kept up even on the messy days. She stared at the cover for a long moment, debating. What was the point? What could she possibly write tonight? How could gratitude exist in a day like this? Her hands moved anyway. She flipped open to a fresh page, gripped a pen, sat in the quiet and searched. At first, nothing came. Just the tight knot in her chest, the exhaustion in her bones. But slowly, she found a thread. Tiny, fragile. She wrote, "I'm grateful I have a safe place to cry." It wasn't a grand, Instagram-worthy gratitude. It wasn't a silver lining that erased her pain. It was simply true. Right now, in this moment, she had a bed. A roof, a room to fall apart and safely. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And that something was enough to keep her tethered to herself, to hope, to tomorrow. Gratitude isn't about denying pain or pretending to be happy. It's about finding a foothold when the ground feels like it's falling away. It's about anchoring to what is real, what is good, even if it's small, so you can survive the storm. Sophie closed the notebook. Tears slid down her cheeks, not frantic, but slow, steady. Not hopeless, not helpless. She wasn't fine. She wasn't fixed, but she was still here, still reaching, still choosing. One small act of noticing, one small act of honoring. Even in the ruins of a hard day, she had found one thing worth holding on to. And that made all the difference. From that night on, she understood something she hadn't before. Gratitude wasn't just a habit. It was a lifeline, not to erase pain, but to make space for healing, even when pain was loud. Part 4. A new way of seeing. How small gratitudes changed her life. Something shifted after that night. It wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks, no grand epiphanies, just a slow, quiet turning inside her. Each evening, Sophie continued her ritual. Some nights, she wrote about big things, a kind word from a friend, a small success at work. Other nights, she clung to the tiniest threads, a soft blanket, a song on the radio, the smell of rain on concrete. Over time, the act of searching for gratitude stopped being a chore. It became a lens, a way of seeing the world differently. She noticed it first on the train. Normally, the ride to work was a blur of gray, faces buried in phones, the hum of exhaustion hanging heavy in the air. But one morning, Sophie looked up and saw a little boy grinning at his reflection in the window, making faces and laughing softly to himself. It was so pure, so unfiltered, she couldn't help but smile. She pulled out her phone and typed a quick note. Grateful for the boy on the train who reminded me how to laugh. Gratitude doesn't just change our emotions. It rewires the brain's attention system, training us to notice small moments of connection, beauty, and kindness that we would otherwise overlook. Over time, this creates a positive feedback loop, increasing emotional resilience and daily satisfaction. At work, she began finding small victories she had once ignored, a project completed ahead of schedule, a colleague's genuine thanks, a few minutes of laughter over bad coffee in the break room. Life didn't become easier, stress didn't disappear, but the weight of each day became easier to carry because she wasn't only carrying the bad anymore. She was carrying the good too. Sophie also noticed a change in how she talked to herself. Where she once said, "I messed up everything." Now, after a long, messy day, she could say, "Today was hard, but I found one thing to be proud of. It wasn't toxic positivity, it was truth." Full and messy and whole, true gratitude doesn't erase difficulties. It creates space around them. It reminds us that we are not only our struggles. We are also the people who keep noticing, keep hoping, keep reaching for small joys even in the dark. Months later, Sophie sat at her tiny kitchen table, flipping through the notebook that had quietly chronicled her journey. Page after page, small handwriting stitched together a life she hadn't known how to appreciate when she started. A life that was imperfect, messy, ordinary, and beautiful. Because beauty, she realized, wasn't something she had to chase. It was something she had to notice, one line at a time, 2 minutes a night, 1,000 tiny sips of hope. She closed the notebook and smiled. Not because everything was perfect now, not because she had all the answers, but because, finally, she trusted herself to find light again, even on the darkest days. Because now she knew. There is always something to be grateful for, even if it's small, even if it's hard to find. Even if tonight, all I can say is, I'm grateful I stayed. Tiny habits, big healing, always. Tiny habits, big healing, episode 4, closing voiceover. Sometimes we think healing requires huge changes, big moves, big wins, big breakthroughs. But sometimes it begins much smaller, 2 minutes, 1 line. A simple pause to remember there is still something good here. In Sophie's story, it wasn't a new job, a new city, or a perfect day that changed her life. It was the decision to notice, to honor the small beauties that had been there all along, waiting for her to look up and see them. Maybe tonight you can try to one small thing, one quiet moment of gratitude, not because life is easy, not because everything is perfect, but because even in the mess, even in the hard days, there is still something worth holding on to, tiny habits. Big healing. Always.